In 1987, U2 had been putting out solid, well-respected records for almost a decade. With a blend of post-punk edge and bona fide musical chops, see what I did there? They had upped the game of 80s rock, but they hadn't yet put out the album that would catapult them to the commercial stratosphere. That all changed with the Joshua Tree, an epic rumination on the promise and disappointment of America with almost spiritual ambitions. This record looked back to roots music to find the real America in real American music. This wasn't your Big Brother's Motley Crue album. With 2 number 1 hits, Joshua Tree made U2 the respected and wealthy stadium band they've remained for the last 4 decades. It doesn't take much to get us to drink Irish whiskey, so we thought we'd take the excuse to sip on Powers and Jameson while discussing U2's greatest album. It's time for episode 84 of Toasting the Classics, The Joshua Tree. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it while we drink something inspired by the classic. My name is Dave McArthur.
Yeah, and my name is Clint Lanier, Dr. Clint Lanier, Professor Clinton Lanier.
Professor, right, Professor, tenure track professor,
Tenure
Dr.
track. Legitimately a professor.
We are back again. What are we doing this week?
So this is your pick. We are doing U2's Joshua Tree, which I thought was a really inspired pick.
I think we got a little tipsy at the end of the Dr. No podcast, and you said, "Okay, you're going to do 2 things," and I just rattled off 2 things, and I thought about it the next day. I was like, "Well, those are pretty good picks. That's not bad." Like, okay,
I think that was a good one. So what is your? I guess experience is a bad word, but what's your background with Joshua Tree? When this came out, you would have been in elementary school, I think, right?
Yeah, I was 10.
Is that right?
I would have been.
Okay.
It came out in May of '87. So actually, I was in 4th grade when this album
Holy cow! Were you aware of it?
So I knew the big songs. I mean, With or Without You and Still Haven't Found what I'm Looking For. Those are number 1 hits. Those are all over the radio. So I knew those songs. I was not an album purchasing person at the time. I think I got Slippery When Wet right about this time, and that was the first album I ever bought.
That's about right. Yeah.
But I always loved the songs at the beginning of this album, and when I became a CD buying person was right around the time when Achtung Baby came out. Mm-hmm. And I think not long after that, I went and got Joshua Tree too, because I was like, oh, that's a great album. I got to have that. So as long as I've had CDs, I think this has been in my rotation. It's something that I like. And it's just been around. With or Without You is my go-to karaoke song. So I do that one a lot. I can't do the other 2. I've tried them and they don't come out very well.
I don't know if I could do that. Oh, I don't know if I could do that part.
No, the hard part is the falsetto that he does in several of these songs. That's the really tough part. I'm not going to inflict that on the listener.
See, I would have to do the whole thing. I'd have to swing around the guitar around my head, and
I don't remember the video.
Wear a vest with no shirt on. With my arms.
Apparently, he had a really bad mullet at that time period.
But, he definitely had a ponytail. And he had, he had the whole Guns Out, Guns Out thing going on.
Yeah, it's a weird look for this particular character. I remember the Achtung Baby videos, but I do not remember the Joshua Tree ones. I must not have been watching a lot of. I did watch MTV when I was a little kid, but not the way I did when I was in high school.
You didn't go back and watch them for this video?
I actually ended up watching some interviews on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
I looked at Joshua Tree and I was thinking about just watching the videos, but then I was thinking, oh, well, there's actually like a half-hour, 45-minute interview of them talking about the album on the 30th anniversary, and I thought I got sucked into watching that, and didn't get around to watching. I did watch the beginning of I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, and it's very pretentious looking. You wouldn't put together a video. People are so much more winky today about everything. You just could not sincerely stand there and look all like morose while singing those lyrics the way that you could then. And get
was that the one where they're walking along like the strip in Vegas? Still,
I didn't watch the whole video, so I don't know the whole. I saw that he's walking in an alley. It's Bono in front of the camera, and he's walking down an alley, and that's what I
think that's the one. Like they're all on the Vegas Strip, and people are looking at him, and so he's that like when they're actually doing the video, obviously they're not singing, so these people are watching this guy, this madman walking down the street, mouthing these words. Hopefully somebody's actually playing the video, like the music behind him, so he knows what he's supposed to be mouthing. But imagine you're just standing, because everybody's just sort of watching him do this, and they're all kind of like,
maybe he actually sang. I mean, it'd be hard to look like you were singing, especially because he's such a powerful singer.
But he'd have to time it with the actual
Yeah.
track, that they're
Yeah.
listening to. I
Yeah.
think that'd be difficult. So
Yeah. Well,
I'm just gonna look it up and make sure.
was he lip syncing
So I
in
haven't
those videos or?
found. Well, I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about the right one. But
Oh yeah, it looks that way. He's in an alley at the beginning of the video, and then for all I know, he might walk out onto the
yeah,
strip. I don't
that's
know.
it. But I think it might be Fremont. Oh, it was Las Vegas. Okay, yeah, it's Las Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah, that's old Las Vegas. But
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks more like old downtown Las Vegas than the strip, like
or I was gonna say like a current Reno. And then you have With or Without You. So that's just them kind of in this dark stage. Like the last quarter of the song is him going, oh, but he
right.
starts like swinging his guitar over his head like it's an
Yeah.
axe or something, which I thought was really weird. And I'm like, what are you gonna do with it? It never shows like, does he throw it? Or does he hit something with it? Does he do a full Pete Townsend and start smashing up the drums with his
Smash it. Yeah.
guitar or something?
Well, I
Um,
find so one of my favorite things about these songs and this album in general
mm,
is it's very genuine and like
mm,
heartfelt the way the guy's singing. Like he really seems to be like you kind of get a sense of it. And I was playing some of the songs on the guitar, just kind of listening to the album, and I was like, no, these are you get into these. These
mhm.
have a real geez, I mean, they're white, so you don't want to say soul quality, but it's kind of what's going on there, you know. I mean, they're
Irish soul, maybe.
Irish soul is kind of a thing, right? I mean,
Uh,
Van Morrison and the Commitments and stuff like it's that's kind of a thing. So I think it's fair to say that that's what's going on. Yeah, getting into it and smashing a guitar, but not really smashing it. It's they're not violent. It's not that kind of passion. So what's your relationship to the album? Was this something you were into at the time, or
let's see. So 87, I would have been. When did it come out in 87? When in 87 did it come out?
I think May, if I remember right. It's either May
Okay,
or March.
March. So March
Maybe
of
March.
87. So I was just at about 13 when this came out. I just turned 13. I was about to
Okay.
turn 13 when this came out. That would have had me in like the sixth or seventh grade, something like
Yeah.
that. I was definitely in middle school or junior high at the time. And you're right, it was everywhere. I loved it because it made the top 10. And at the time, I remember like there being a lot of R&B stuff, which I have never been into that. Hearing this on the top 10, getting a lot of rotation on the radio stations, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, With or Without You, and so forth. And Where the Streets Have No Name, that was the other one. Big one that was always in rotation. They actually came here on tour on
Oh,
their
nice.
Joshua Tree tour, which we're in the middle of nowhere, but we used to get some really big acts. And I remember specifically because
Yeah.
I remember this one kid, Jason, I can't remember Jason's last name, but he was like the really rich kid in school. He did all the rich kid stuff. What I mean by that is if you've ever seen 16 Candles or any of those movies, the rich
He's
kids
like
always
the
did.
Andrew McCarthy character in
Andrew McCarthy, right? Yeah, Pretty in Pink.
God.
But yeah, so I'm like, what 13-year-old, plays tennis and does all this other stuff. So anyway, he's kind of the rich kid. He shows up with Joshua Tree concert shirt
Oh, that's
one
awesome.
day, and I'm like, oh, that jerk.
Yeah,
Not only is he rich and playing tennis and doing all these
that's
things
pretty
that
cool.
I can never do, but he went to see the Joshua Tree.
So this is a thought that I wrote down about this, and maybe this isn't the right place to talk about it, but it reminds me of it. Is that I think so. I was talking about like kind of the emotions that this kind of music would elicit, and I can't even imagine seeing you two live. The
Uh-huh.
kind of emotions that would trigger for me. That would be
Yeah.
like a big thing for me. And I was thinking back in the 70s and 80s, and maybe a little bit still into the 90s, I think that rock shows and this kind of music filled almost like the sort of role that people used to have for religion back in the day. You
Hmm.
go and you're in a big group with a bunch of people and everybody's singing along, everybody's very like your emotions are high and stuff like that. Like for people who don't have religion, this would be like the only time. Like I don't go to church, I've never gone to church.
Yeah.
This would
You're
be
talking
the
about like a
time
revival
when
type,
I
like a
would go to
revival
something,
type of thing, right?
not an Anglican service, but like
Yeah.
something where everybody's enjoying themselves
Like
and
like a
getting in.
Billy Graham, a bunch of people singing and
Right, that
everybody
kind
kind of
of thing.
experiencing it.
I was thinking there's nothing like that for kids today. They don't go to
Yeah.
shows and get into the concert and stuff like that. That's just not a thing. Like they hardly leave their houses. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I wonder what is there anything for people growing up today? And then I was thinking it's probably not one of the many reasons why they're all on antidepressants. It's just have nothing to go
Maybe.
and share with other
Maybe.
people. No
But yeah,
communal
there's
experience whatsoever.
no social mechanisms, and I don't know, maybe I thought it was funny, like Ainsley, there was this like YouTube convention or something, and she wanted to go and see all her favorite YouTubers, and I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm not supporting that. But then I started
Yeah.
thinking about it, and like they don't have TV, they don't
Yeah.
have shows, they don't have all the stuff that we had. Like these are their
Yeah.
superstars. Like these are the people they know. They know
Right.
YouTubers and they know TikTokers
Uh-huh.
and Instagram influencers and all these other idiots. It's just something we can't imagine. But we had television, right? Three or four channels when I was a
Right.
kid, and then cable when I got into college.
Television was a solo thing, but like music, going to music shows and going to films were communal experiences.
Yeah,
Like where you'd go and you'd share them with a couple hundred other
yeah,
people at the very least. And that's I think kind of important. I think people need that. I think we're
yeah,
social animals. I don't know if it's great to sit in your room all the time and
yeah.
that's the only way you ingest media.
This record dropped, I think, at the height of that. When did Disintegration from The Cure come out? That was like 86 or 87, wasn't it?
89. That's 89.
89. Okay, so 2 years after
Yeah.
this. The sound and the tones and the themes, they're
Mm-hmm.
not that far apart. There's a lot of
No,
similarities, I think.
especially past track 4,
Yeah.
right? And you get to
Yes. Yeah,
track
for
4 on this
sure.
album. They sort of go downhill as the album goes on in terms of songness until
Yeah.
the last 2 tracks are like the Cure album. They're atmospheric. They're sort of just there's strange noises going on. They're not bad. They're a good part of
Yeah.
the album, but it's just not the same thing. The first
Right.
3 tracks of this album, I would I haven't really researched this, but I would defy somebody to come up with a better 1, 2, 3 punch on any album
Right.
ever.
Yeah.
Like in terms of just bang, bang, bang. Those are 3 songs. Like forget about it. Like you'd go to a U2 show today in 2023 if those were the only 3 songs they ever wrote. You'd be like, I got to go see that band that
Yeah.
made those
Yeah.
songs.
Right.
And everything else would just be icing on the cake. Oh, by the way, there's Bloody Sunday and
Yeah.
Pride, a whole bunch of other stuff too. But I can't think of any album like that has that kind of opening.
This, and we'll just, throw it out there that this is supposedly like one of the top best albums of all time, according to Rolling Stone.
Stone, yeah, I can't remember whether it was 22nd was U2 themselves or whether it was 22nd of all time was this album, one of the 500 greatest.
I want to
I
say it
think
was
U2, the band, was the 22nd most influential band, according to
right, but
Rolling Stone. I can't remember
the top 100 albums of all time. I can't. This was way
what
up
album
there.
comes in. I
Yeah,
don't think it's
yeah.
as high as you, which might be sort of the kiss of death critically.
The Guardian has it at number 57 of top 100. The Rolling Stone named it number 26 on their 2003 list of the 500 greatest albums of all time.
Okay, that's pretty high. That's very
So
high.
it's way up there. I mean, it just came at a time when I don't think there's a lot coming out. Let me just see
Well, we talked about this before when we talked about
albums.
Disintegration because it's
Houston,
before the big wave of alternative.
1987. Uh-huh.
It's the same year Appetite for Destruction came out, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's also 87.
No, that was 87. Appetite for
Yeah.
Destruction
Oh,
was 87.
it was 87. Okay.
Boy, there was a lot of good stuff that came out in 87. Can I go down the
Yeah, yeah.
list?
Give me a couple of good examples. Yeah,
Well, we've got Joshua Tree from U2, obviously. You've got
right.
Bad from Michael Jackson.
Okay, I think we can
Um,
toss that.
okay. All right. Appetite for Destruction, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, for those that are into them, you got Document by REM, Strange Ways Here We Come by the Smiths. You've got a new album from the Pet Shop Boys. You've got Depeche Mode. But then you've got stuff like the stuff that would have played down here, like Whitney Houston. I think her first
I was
album.
gonna say Whitney Houston was huge at the time.
Yeah.
And Whitney Houston is great. She's awesome, but that's not my kind of it's not I'm not gonna sit and listen to Whitney
Right.
Houston on
Yeah.
record over.
Me
She's awesome
neither.
and I do actually like her, but that's just not what I'm gonna be listening to.
Right. But that's what would have been all over the radio here at the
Yeah.
time.
It was in DC as well with Whitney
Oh,
Houston all over the place.
In Excess, Kick,
Mm-hmm.
that album came
Yeah,
out.
Kick is actually
Uh,
one of my favorite albums. I really like that one.
oh, Kiss
But
Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me came out that year.
that's right.
Hysteria from Def Leppard. That
Yeah,
was
that was getting
87.
played a lot. I don't know if that one holds up to the test. Hey, what has 7 arms and sucks?
What?
Def Leppard.
That's a good one.
All
Girls,
right.
Girls, Girls from Motley Crue.
That's the kind of music I
that was
remember
that
from the
was
time. There was something about the American rock music at the time where the image was
uh-huh.
off-putting to me. I really liked Appetite for Destruction, but that hair band thing was just off-putting to me.
Yeah,
I wasn't into that. I think I might have just been a couple years too young for it. Like it was really cool, and then by the time I was getting bigger, that's what everybody's big brother looked like.
Yeah.
It just didn't seem cool to me.
I mean, this is just sort of different from everything out there because you got a lot of hair bands that came out. You had a lot of R&B. LL Cool J came out.
if it was coming from the other side of the pond, it was mostly
Right.
synth pop stuff like Depeche Mode and Pet Shop
Like
Boys, which
Depeche
were
Mode,
huge at
Pet
the
Shop
time.
Boys. Of course, where do you put the Smiths? I mean, they're kind of a post-punk
Well, I don't
band
know if
too.
Strange Ways is not really vintage Smiths to me. It's a little bit
Mm,
after their best stuff. I
mm,
like that album in a different kind of way. It's more like
mm,
Morrissey.
mm.
So it's I don't know what that really kind of compares to. You two actually talked about being inspired by Johnny Marr's guitar playing. The Edge was
Huh.
like, I love the way that guy plays guitar, and
Yeah.
that's big on Joshua Tree. He's definitely
Yeah.
doing some of that jangly, like effect laden guitar
Yeah.
work that Johnny Marr
Yeah.
does. There isn't a lot of Johnny Marr, I don't think, on Strange Ways as much. So I
Yeah.
think it's kind of not to
Maybe.
my ear, but I think the
Well,
uh,
I just remember there was a lot of like the Whitney Houston and the synth pop stuff, and
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of that R&B junk came out, and I was never into really any of that stuff at all. I like some Depeche Mode, but I'm not really into all of their stuff. They get a bit. Oh, also George Michael's Faith came out, which was huge, and they're
Yes,
all over the
I did
place.
like George Michael quite a bit.
Uh,
I did
I'm
like
sure
George
you
Michael.
did.
Yeah.
Hey, anyway,
Oh, I
and
see. I see where you're going with that.
what?
Did you watch the Wham documentary, by the way? It was very
No,
entertaining. You should watch that.
I've heard things about it, but I
By the way, what are we drinking?
Oh, what are we drinking? Well, I'm drinking something called Powers Irish Whiskey. What are you drinking?
I am drinking something called Jameson Irish whiskey.
Jameson
And
Irish Whiskey.
I had a moment of feeling
Hmm.
kind of bad about picking Irish whiskey because I was looking into U2's history and they were kind of, I don't know if they were ever teetotalers, but they were pretty religious early
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
And
I think still.
normally for Irish people, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't drink. You might be
Right.
religious, drink anyway. And I was watching this interview with them, and they've got a bottle of whiskey in front of them, and the Edge
Yeah.
is he's in his 60s and he's still drinking. So I think we're okay. I think we're on solid grounds with some Irish whiskey, which is no longer. I don't know about Powers, but Jameson is actually not distilled in Dublin anymore.
Right.
So not their stomping grounds
Right.
technically. They're from Dublin, whereas this is from County Cork down south. But
Yeah. Jameson and Powers are the two biggest. Irish whiskey's tough because there were up until like World War One and Prohibition, there were hundreds of Irish whiskey distilleries, and just let's just call them whiskey distilleries in
uh,
Ireland. Then they all pretty much got shut down just because people's tastes moved on and
well, there was
taxes and
also
a bunch of
the
other
Civil War.
issues. Well, there was the war. Yeah, the war shut a lot of them
There
down
was
too. But
they specifically said that Jameson was disrupted badly, and I'm sure some of the smaller distillers were disrupted even worse between 1919 and 1921, right after
right.
World War I. And then there's a temperance
And
movement about the same time,
well,
and
I think prohibition, our prohibition, I think
right,
affected it quite a bit. So it got reduced to like there were only like six or seven distilleries, I think, as
huh.
late as about 10 years ago. And Jameson,
Oh wow, I didn't realize it was that. That's
Jameson
interesting.
Powers were the two biggest. And so pretty much any Irish whiskey label that you'd find was either made by Jameson or Powers. Now, however, there are all these independent distilleries all over Ireland. And just kind of like
Hmm.
in America, where we have this kind of artisanal resurgence of bourbon, it's sort of like that over there. So, there's a lot of places kind of going back to the legacy, but Irish whiskey is sort of special because I think it's the earliest example of whiskey
Well, it's a
around
Gaelic word, but then again, that could be from either Scotland or Ireland, I suppose.
right. Yeah, and it means water of life. But I think the oldest evidence suggests it was from about the 13th century. Scotch is about from the 15th, 16th century.
Oh, that
Um,
doesn't go back anywhere near as far. I guess probably they didn't have distillation technology in a place like Ireland going much farther back than that.
Distillation derives from the Middle East, and we think that monks brought the technology back from the Middle East, from the Crusades and so forth. In the Middle East, they weren't distilling really alcohol; they were distilling like perfumes, because they were distilling like plant essences. If your
Oh,
wife or know anybody that uses those essential oils, they were kind of making those things, but they were making perfumes. Like perfume is alcohol based, right? And so they're making perfumes and things like that. And they started essentially distilling beer when they brought it back to Ireland and eventually England and Scotland. So you take some beer, you don't hop it, and you distill it instead. You distill the
mhm.
fermented beer, and you get whiskey, and that's
I have always wondered what the main differences are between Irish and Scottish whiskey. What I found is that distilling it three times. Now I know
Mhm.
Jameson does that. Is that
Yeah.
universal in Irish whiskey, or is that an Irish whiskey
Well,
thing, or is that just
they
Jameson?
they say that, but I think a lot of them are pretty much column still now anymore. But excuse me, the real main difference between Scotch and Irish whiskey, Scotch whiskey is only made with malted barley, 100% malted barley. Irish whiskey can be made with a combination of cereal grains,
Right.
so rye and barley and other things. They typically use barley,
So,
but
but also not just different grains, but they also can use malted and unmalted.
correct. Yeah, yeah,
Because they said
yeah,
that was something I read also. I didn't know that
yeah.
before. And
So,
they fuel the distillation process with coal and like other things. They don't use peat to fuel the process. Apparently, Scotch whiskey usually use peat not only as part of the drink, but you fuel the distill
huh.
that way.
Well, that would sort of make sense. That peat was always used. I mean, the fueling part can be really anything because it doesn't affect the taste. But
You wouldn't
um,
think so, right? I mean, there'd be some smoke maybe, but
well,
that's not where your
that
taste
wouldn't
comes from.
that wouldn't matter once it's in the still. What where it matters
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
so that they when they roast the barley, when they malt
Uh-huh.
it, because what happens the way you do the barley is you pick the barley and then you get the barley wet, and so it starts sprouting, and that's when the sugar content of the barley
Right.
is increased, right? Well, then they have to
Okay.
kill it. They have to kill it so it doesn't grow into plants. The way they kill it is they roast it, right,
Okay.
to stop the growing. The way they roasted it in Scotland is through peat. They would do peat
Okay.
fires to roast it and to stop it. But that would smoke it essentially. That gives it flavor.
I think I might have gotten that wrong. I think that might be what it was. I think maybe they do the roasting process is what they use
The
different
fuel,
things
yeah,
for. Yeah, I think it's
yeah,
the fuel for the
yeah,
roasting process.
probably,
I think I
probably,
misread that because I
yeah.
don't know as much about the chemistry and the industrial process as you do. But yeah, I think that might be that would definitely change what it
Oh
tastes
God,
like.
yeah, yeah. That'll totally
Yeah.
take.
This doesn't taste peaty at all, and I don't think it's just the triple distilling. I think it just is different. I think it's
It's
just
a
a
smooth,
different.
you know, Irish whiskey. All Irish whiskey is going to be a really smooth, really easy to drink, or whiskey rather. Scotch whiskey, especially the really peaty stuff, it can be like licking an ashtray. It really can, and so sometimes
Yeah.
that's not what you're looking forward to after a hard day's work. I got to admit, tastes great with a cigar on a cold evening in front of a fireplace. There's nothing better than really peaty glass of scotch and a cigar. So.
I've moved away from my Scotch phase. I don't dislike Scotch, but I'm not as into it. I think if I was going to choose something, to be honest, I've learned that living in New York, you don't want to drink hard stuff. The bars don't close. You do not want to go out at 8 o'clock p.m.
Yeah,
and stay out till 4 drinking hard stuff.
right,
I
right.
have learned to just have a seltzer or a light beer because it's going to be it's a marathon, not a sprint in this town.
That's
So
true. Very
I
true.
haven't been drinking as much hard stuff as I once did, but if I were going to choose, it would be bourbon. I
Yeah.
really do kind of prefer bourbon, but I like the Scotch, and Jameson's a perfectly good whiskey. I haven't had Powers. I'm going to try it. I think the next time I'm out, I got a way too big bottle of Jameson. The only thing he had for sale was the what size is this? It's big. It's like a liter bottle.
Oh, it's a handle. Is it a handle?
Yeah, it's a liter.
Pretty
It's a
much. Yeah.
liter. Although
Yeah.
it's
Those are.
spelled Litre, so for all I know, that's not the same liter we have in America.
I was drinking liters of beer about 4 weeks ago. I think it was. So in
Nice. Did you get to
Germany.
go anywhere good over the summer?
Yeah, we went to Denmark, Germany,
Oh,
and
that's right.
Switzerland.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
wow. That's pretty ambitious. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a good
Nice.
2.5 weeks of
We
travel
stayed
there.
domestic. We did a bunch of cool stuff in America, but we didn't
Mhm.
never left the country. So we did California, national parks, and then we went up to Maine. Last week we camped up in Maine, so it was pretty
Oh,
cool.
cool. Well, you guys
Well,
are always
anyway,
traveling. I know the kids do a lot of stuff. So
we should get back to the Joshua Tree.
yeah,
Yeah, I was surprised that the album is called The Joshua Tree and
the
not just
Joshua
Joshua
Tree.
Tree. I always
Yeah.
called it just Joshua Tree because when I put it into Wikipedia, it was like redirected from Joshua Tree. I'm like, dude, I think you know what I meant.
Right, right. Just
Just being
well,
snide right now.
I was sort of surprised to find out that that name didn't occur to them until the end when they're creating the album cover. They didn't even know what it was until they were trying to take photographs, and the photographer for the album was wanting to do like this desert landscape, and he had this idea. He's like, let's go down to Joshua Tree, and they're like, what's that? And so they talked about it, and they found out what the Joshua Tree was, and they said, hey, that sounds pretty cool. A little bit of significance for their religious kind of
Yeah.
background, and that's how it got it. I was like, wow, just kind of the
Yeah,
spur of the moment, you know?
I looked into it and I can't really find a whole lot of connection between the tree itself and the album, except
Mhm.
it's the idea of the mythical open spaces of America. Okay, fine,
Right.
Joshua Tree. That kind of makes sense. And you, like you said, the religious resonance. Apparently, there's not much of an agreement why the tree is called that.
Right.
They think sort of the Mormons called it that when they got out there, but
Right.
other than that, there's really no firm
Yeah.
explanation about even
Right.
why. What story about Joshua? There's a story where Joshua holds his arms up for a really long time, and it almost sounds like a retcon where somebody was like, "Well, that's what a Joshua tree looks like." So that's might have been what they're
Right.
talking.
So okay.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't make it. Maybe it's what did he have? He had a Technicolor dream coat. He went to Egypt.
Right.
I don't really know much. No, that's Joseph.
Yeah.
What am I?
That
That's
was
not even the
Joseph.
right
Yeah.
biblical
Yeah.
character.
That's not the
Joshua was a
same. No.
different guy. Joshua was a different guy. Forget it. Did he knock down walls with a trumpet? Is that
Uh,
Joshua?
that
No,
was that was at
maybe.
Jericho.
That was at Jericho, but was it
Yeah.
Joshua? I don't know. Who
You're
knows?
asking you're asking the wrong guy about Old Testament stuff.
About Bible stuff? I would have thought you would be
Old
Bible
old
up and down.
Old Testament
Oh,
stuff.
Old Testament. Okay, fair
Yeah,
enough.
I'm
Yeah, I
not
don't know. I don't. You definitely don't want to ask me about the New Testament. I once knew a lot about the Old Testament.
right. Anyway, but I thought that was interesting that just kind of spur of the moment. Hey, let's call it that.
I
You
drove through
know,
there one time, and if I had known that the Joshua Tree was there, the one from the album cover, I definitely would have gone out of my way to see it.
yeah.
I drove west of Joshua Tree National Park one time and up to Mount Whitney, which I would have
Mhm.
gone right past it, and I totally would have stopped and checked it out. Apparently, it
Yeah.
fell down. It's dead. Died
Ah,
not that long ago. It's just out, but
boo.
it's still there. The tree's still there, laying down on the ground. But
Ah.
they're yuccas.
Yeah,
Did you
just a
know that?
yucca. Yeah, just a
It's the
yucca with a
same.
bunch of
It's different. It's the same, but it's the same genus. Yes,
best-selling album they've had, I think. Actually, was this
I think it's the
was
biggest album.
was this bigger than Octum Baby?
I think so. And this is where they really took off into being the huge touring band that
Yeah.
they became. And I think that's mostly what their legacy is today. I actually looked it up. I was thinking, geez, is there any way I could see you too? And apparently they're doing a residency in Las Vegas now.
Wow.
I
Huh.
was like, that is so not the U2
Yeah,
that I
it's not.
think of. Like setting up a residency in Las Vegas is very
Oh, you know what? I
corporate.
heard that.
Like it's
There's a place in Vegas called the Sphere, I think it is. And I think they're
okay.
doing it there. And they're doing sort of remember their Zoo TV thing that was all crazy and psychedelic with all the lights and stuff like that?
Is that the one
Um,
where he had like three different characters, sort of Garth
yeah,
Brooks style, and like,
yeah,
yeah,
I think so. But they're all sort of over the top. I think that's where it's happening. Yeah, live at the Sphere. So it's the Sphere at the Venetian Resort, previously referred to as MSG Sphere, the Spherical Music and Entertainment Arena in Paradise, Nevada, huh? Near the Las Vegas Strip, east of the Venetian Resort.
it's
Yeah,
some suburb of Vegas, basically, or
yeah, basically. So U2 Las Vegas
oh,
tickets live at the
I know
Sphere.
exactly where that is. You're talking about that area just off the strip behind where the Venetian is.
Yeah,
There's a whole bunch of like empty lots, so they must have just built that. It's
right.
where that new Ferris wheel thing is. Have you seen the Ferris
Yes,
wheel?
yes, yeah. I've
It's
been
it's
on
over
that.
there. Yeah.
There's one car on there where it's basically drink and drown for the for the time that
What
it
does
goes.
that mean?
It takes you drink as much as you want, open bar. So
Oh wow,
it's more expensive to be in that car than the other cars. But
I imagine so.
for 30 minutes that it goes around, 30 minutes, whatever it is, it's just open bar. So they have a bartender so you can have a good time. But yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right. It's just on the other side of that. So U2 Octung Baby live at the Sphere.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely go to see them if I was going to be there. It seems kind of antithetical to the message of U2. Bono always struck me as having not quite the politics of some of the punk rock bands of the 80s, if you know what I mean, but
Mhm.
similar, like very, he was always talking about American involvement in Latin America and stuff like
Yeah,
that. But it's really cool how, and I think this album is representative of it. It's very cool how it was always like, we really do love this idea you guys have over here,
yeah,
this idea of America.
yeah.
We're just very critical about what's actually going on and your political involvements. And I was listening to them talk about it on the interview I watched. And I was thinking, that's pretty much how I feel, except that I am American. So I have an added element of like, this is my country. I just love my country because it's where I'm from. The same way you like Ireland, and the guy that was interviewing him, he's from New Zealand. Like, it's just your country, whatever. Everybody loves their own country to some extent, right?
Right.
But there's also that element of, and I don't know how you feel about this, but there's that mythical ideal that we all aspire to, and something that seems really awesome. And it really, everybody really does believe in it in America. We're always trying to get back to it in some way, no matter what side of the spectrum you're from. of the political spectrum, you're trying to get back to the ideals of the founding documents and things like that. But then there's always all this, like they had this whole story they were telling about going to Phoenix, Arizona, and they were participating in the campaign to get MLK Day officially on the school roster in Arizona. And there was a lot of resistance to it, and even like death threats against them, like to the point where the security guards were like, do not sing the song Pride about MLK. We think there's a credible threat somebody's going to shoot you during the song.
Jeez.
Like, so don't do it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, that's the thing that you have to be critical about as an American, because that's part of what we are, right? People not wanting to think about MLK, and they'll shoot somebody if they talk about it. That's part of our country. We can't really deny that, and it conflicts with those great ideals. And I guess I was listening to him. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much the same way I feel about America. Exactly. We should be critical. We should be critical of the stuff that sucks, but always remember those great ideals and try to. And he actually made the point. He said that, like, he's Irish, and that's a country. And the implication was, he loves his country, but he was like, Ireland's not an idea. There's no idea of the perfect Ireland that, like, we're always trying to get back to. And I was thinking, like, yeah, that is kind of the difference. That's the only little bit of American exceptionalism I still believe in, is like, we have an ideal and a almost like a national religion, like, where we're trying to get back to the ideas of the founding fathers, who themselves were conflicted because they owned slaves and stuff like that. But it's been conflicted since day one. But anyway, I thought it was a pretty cool background theme to this album to have that in there, and especially from an outsider, someone from another country looking at our country and kind of echoing the same things.
Well, that was actually, and I'll just go ahead and say it now, that was sort of my big surprise. I didn't realize that it was an allegory on America. But after reading about it and reading some of the interviews, so forth, they did, and really listening to the music and looking at what they were saying in the music, I can see it, how they were kind of exploring what America means. And I sort of found, like, still haven't found what I'm looking for. That's been, a lot of people have really kind of been critical about it in terms of trying to define what that song means. And some people have said, well, it's Bono's talking about his religion and so forth. And for me, I got that he's sort of talking about that America,
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
That there is this ideal. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I'm looking for America.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's actually really good.
After I read all about it, I went back, listened to it again, and I saw, I heard a lot of it in there. And what's interesting is that not a lot, but there are quite a few of these songs were based not on America, but something that they saw maybe as a result of America. So, like, South America that disappeared and stuff like that, from others that disappeared. He's talking about what's going on in South America, which is a result of our foreign policy. I think a lot of what he says in those songs can be applied in America as well, applied to America rather, as far as the messaging goes. But like the mine shutting down, I think that was One Tree Hill or something like that.
Red Hill Mining.
Oh, Red Hill Mine Town, things like that. And you sort of saw that in the 80s.
Definitely
the shift of.
I think there's a little bit of resonance with Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, right. That's what I saw. Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen's music is like roots, like is I don't want to say rooted in, but rooted in roots music. It's going back a little bit to the blues and the stuff where rock came from, and he's got like a working class message. It's very similar. It's like, oh, this town used to make cars, and now it's shut down, and everybody's poor, and Bobby drinks too much. You too could write that song just as much as Bruce Springsteen. That's the same kind of song that both bands would make. And I think there's it's like a richer texture to something. And I really do love the roots music. The roots music thing is not something I was aware of. I read about it while getting ready for this show. I didn't even really understand what that term meant. I know that, so there's been this idea for a long time that, like, rock and roll music, most popular form of music in the late 20th century, essentially, that essentially is created by African Americans, which is on one sense true. There's Chuck Berry and all those people in the early 50s, 100%. But that music itself was rooted in something going farther back, roots music, which led to jazz and the blues and modern country and rock and roll and just about everything in American music today. And that was more of an equal contribution from, like, all the kinds of Americans. It's got a lot of Celtic stuff in it. It's got a lot of African stuff in it. It's got a lot of it's really like an actual, if Americans had actually been marrying each other, intermarrying and creating like an American species,
Hmm.
that music is what we would be like as a
Right.
nation,
Yeah.
which we're not because of BS that kept that from happening.
Tribalism and stuff like that. Yeah.
Tribalism and stuff like that. Right. Worse than tribalism, but yeah.
Yeah.
What's the word? Apartheid,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
American apartheid. But anyway, I think that's really cool. Actually inspired me. I'm going to look into roots music and start listening
Mhm.
to some of it, learning about it a little bit more, because the U2 and Bruce Springsteen, same thing. They seem richer and more interesting than some of the other stuff that was going on at the time
Right.
because of going back to those roots. They seem to have deeper roots. The music seems deeper than Guns N' Roses, because Guns N' Roses, that's a bit like, one of the things I think about U2 is U2 is like a post-punk or punk band. They started from that, but they've got serious musical chops. They're
Mhm.
just really good at their instruments. They didn't start out that way. They actually
Right.
kind of learned to be that way. But like Guns N' Roses is the same way. Those guys have terrific musical chops.
Yeah.
They're just, the music doesn't really seem as cool to me, I guess,
Mhm.
is what I'm talking about. Like they don't seem quite as timeless. They seem very rooted in the 80s. Whereas you could listen to U2. I don't know. Honestly, anything that's rock and roll, people actually playing their instruments, I don't think a kid today would listen to. I
Well,
think they'd be
I
like,
think there's something. I think
where's the auto tune? And they just
yeah.
wouldn't listen to it. But
I'll speak to that for a minute, then I want to talk about the band itself. But I think there's something to be said about, when you have music that has that isn't just superficial, right? When there are layers
right.
to it, right? Girls, girls, girls has pretty much
Yes.
just one
That is a
meaning,
great
right?
example of what I'm talking about.
Whereas still haven't found what I'm looking for. People disagree about what it means. What is it,
Right.
what is he talking about? It could mean the politics, and it could mean, this idea of a fictionalized or a mythical rather America, or it could mean his relationship with God, which some people say is what he's talking about.
But
And
Clint, I think there's a legitimate interpretation of girls, girls, girls that
yeah,
critiques the male gaze.
well, that's certainly true. That's
You know,
certainly true. I think they're turning it around on us.
right? Exactly.
But you've got. I mean, there's a reason Elvis Costello is so revered, by people, or Tom Waits, or any of these people that have, they can create music. And the thing is, I mean, they're not popular. U2 broke through and got popular as well as interesting.
You know what's
But you
really
have
interesting about
you have
what
like all these interesting bands that I think will outlast, the bubblegum stuff. They won't get the like the fame or the fortune like
well,
some
I
of the
don't think
bubblegum stuff.
if Revolver and Sergeant Pepper's hadn't happened, I don't
Yeah,
think you would listen to the Beatles today.
you're
Even though
probably right.
I
Yeah,
love the Beatles early stuff. It's fun,
yeah,
but I would have never listened to that if it hadn't been for
right.
the really serious
Yeah.
interpretive value stuff that happened later in their career. It's
Well,
really
and
interesting. It's interesting you said that about the lyrics of the songs, because the interview that I watched,
mhm,
Bono was talking about how he never liked Where the Streets Have No Name. He always felt like the song wasn't finished. He didn't
mhm,
finish the lyrics and he didn't complete it. And the interviewer says, I actually think it's really interesting to leave a song incomplete because you put it out there and now it's for the listener to interpret. And so you're having
right.
a conversation with the listener. And Bono, it was like you could see the look on his face. He was like, "Oh, that's exactly why that song's good." It was like the first time he'd ever thought of it. He was like, "Oh, you're right. Yeah, it's an incomplete. The lyrics are. It's an incomplete thought." And
Mhm,
so I put it out there, and I have these ideas, but
right.
then other people can resonate and bring their own meaning to it. And so when he goes to the concert and sings in front of everybody, and they're singing along
Mhm,
to Where the Streets Have No Name, they're bringing
mhm.
their own meaning to it, and so it's just richer. And I was like, let's really, it was like watching the guy understand his own art just by somebody asking him a question. It was really,
That's interesting.
he's very, he was very thoughtful about the creation of the music and stuff.
Mhm,
It was very, it's not like, I remember hearing an interview with Sam Smith where he said
mhm,
that he did the song for Spectre,
mhm.
and he was like, I only spent like 15 minutes on it. And I was like, yeah, you can tell, dude. Like I
Right.
wouldn't brag about that. It
Right.
sounds like
Right.
you spent about 15, 20
Yeah.
minutes on that song. So
Yeah.
anyway, put some thought into your art.
Right.
Like I
There
put some
there is.
thought into this podcast, right? I mean,
Yeah,
everybody can tell,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
There's
No, there are
definitely
layers to it. It's like an onion or a cake or something. I don't
exactly
know.
like an
I
onion
think
because nobody really wants to eat it. Is that what you're saying?
right.
Let's say
So
it's like a cake. Let's say
without
it's
this
like a cake.
album, it is like, yeah, it's like a cake. Without this album, then, so this album is sort of their Revolver or Pet Sound or something that elevates them to another level. Is that right? OK
So
Computer or
so
something.
that brings up a really interesting thought
Hmm.
because their revolver, their Pet Sounds is the album before this, Unforgettable Fire.
Hmm.
Because their producer actually had them do some of the techniques that Brian Wilson used to create Pet Sounds,
Hmm.
broken bottles and things like
Yes.
that. Like
Right.
and Unforgettable Fire was almost too artistic for everybody. People didn't really
Yeah.
like it that much. And then they did the roots music thing with this one that was just what comes after Sergeant Pepper for the Beatles? Is there one where they go? It's kind of like I remember reading one time. I had a book of Billboard's top number one hits, and it was just describing all the number one hits that had ever happened on Billboard. And they were talking about With or Without You, and they said this
Hmm.
is their Hey Jude.
Hmm.
This is their song that like you'll always sing. You'll always know
Hmm.
this song. It's very powerful. It seems meaningful. It's not really doing anything that's never been done before. It's not really like an attempt. Although Bono
Yeah.
was saying it's an extremely weird song, and the things they're doing in the song are not what other people are doing. I don't know. I feel like it's been a part of my life for almost 40 years, so
Yeah.
I don't really know, but I can't analyze it as something I've never heard
Yeah.
before. But
Bono,
uh-huh.
The Edge,
The Edge,
Adam,
Adam Clayton.
and Larry.
Wait, is it Adam Clayton? It is Adam Clayton.
Yeah.
Right.
And Larry. I just feel bad for Larry. If there's any name that anybody that they should have given a cooler name to, Larry sounds
Yeah.
like somebody with a trombone, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And he's the
Yep.
drummer, you know?
He's the
He's the
drummer.
drummer of all people. He's the drummer.
Some people say that Ringo is the luckiest drummer ever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I listen to the Beatles, I'm like, I hear Ringo doing some stuff on
Yeah.
some of
That's
these songs.
true. Yeah.
Larry Mullen Jr. is probably the luckiest drummer that
Right.
ever existed. I
Right.
do you even know what are the drums on this album? I haven't gone back and analyzed the other stuff, but on this album, it's just
Yeah. There's not a lot to it.
there's not a lot of
Not a lot.
not a lot going on, right? I
Right.
mean,
But honestly, I tried to read an analysis of how the Edge plays in this album. I couldn't
yeah,
follow it. I had no idea what the hell
no,
they were
it's
talking about.
a lot of his technical electrical guitar stuff. Delay
It
effect is
is.
a big part of
Yeah,
what he
yeah,
does.
yeah. Something where he can like fill in notes with other notes. Like he can not play all the notes, but with
Right.
some echo reverb thing, it's filling in the note. And I was like, what? I mean,
Yeah,
I
no.
hear it and it sounds cool.
I
And
hear it and
and
it's very cool.
and
There's
but
there's
apparently he's doing really complicated stuff to make it sound cool, right?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
He's a minimalist guitar player in a lot of
yeah,
ways. He's not
right,
in terms of what he's doing, he's not. But in terms of what we hear, his theory is that guitar notes are very expensive,
right,
and,
right,
and so you do not want to have too many of them. So he tries to do
right.
something really cool with each one that he does. And I think that comes out, and I think Bono's vocals are superior. I don't
Yeah.
really know. There's not a whole lot else, and I mean Axl Rose is a really good vocalist as
Hmm.
well. But in terms of that time period in rock and roll, I don't know if there's anybody that really compares.
Yeah.
That's
No,
what stands out to me. That when I went back, I actually was listening to some of their older stuff. When I went back and listened to Boy, the second Bono sings on the first song, you're like, that's something special.
yeah,
There's something
yeah,
special going on there. Like that's not just a four-piece band.
right.
There's something special going on here.
And he's particularly gifted. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think he really is. And I think that's 80% of what makes U2 a good band is probably his
Yeah,
voice and the
yeah. His
way that he
vocals are.
handles it.
Yeah,
Although the Edge's guitar work is really cool too.
yeah, yeah.
And I
And
don't know, I guess Adam Clayton the one that does all the other instruments? Like I know he does the bass, but does Larry Mullen do the keyboards? Because the keyboards are pretty distinctive on Joshua Tree as well.
actually I think the Edge does keyboards. Yeah,
Oh,
The Edge
okay.
does the keyboards
Oh, okay, okay.
and
Because
backing
that's pretty
vocals.
like the opening of Where the Streets Have No Name.
Hmm.
I was actually flipping through some stuff, and I don't remember why I ended up. Oh, I was looking at my guitar app, and I put on. It's almost like a karaoke version of the song.
Uh,
It's just the keys and the instruments playing,
mhm,
and even that, listening to the synth that opens up Where the Streets
mhm,
Have No Name, I got the same like tingle in the back of my neck.
mhm.
I was like, this is just really well put together.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I went to Bill Clinton appeared in my hometown, like at one of the high schools. He
Hmm.
just came and did a speech one time, and he actually landed on, must have been 96 because he was already president. And he landed in a helicopter on the field outside, and they
Hmm.
played. Actually, can't remember whether it was Where the Streets Have No Name or one of them. but it had the opening with like the
Yeah,
guitar
that's
like,
weird. Yeah.
and it was really really impressive, like as a
Yeah.
spectacle. I think
Oh, cool.
somebody in his staff was just like, you too knows how to do a show,
Yeah.
like they know how to
Yeah.
open, so we're
Well,
gonna
and
put.
and the kids know who U2 is. They won't know, you know,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
won't
yeah,
know
exactly.
something else. So
Well, then weirdly enough, also Bruce Hornsby was actually there and played
that's
the
weird.
piano like in front of everybody,
That's great.
which is very strange. Which,
Yeah, it's
anyway,
depressing, but okay.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
but yeah, I was just looking over their names. You got Bono, his real name's
Paul something,
Paul something. The Edge is David
Koenig or something like
something, and then Adam, and then Larry. Oh,
Paul
Larry,
Hewson. It's Paul Hewson is Bono.
Paul Houston,
David
David
Evans is the Edge.
Evans. Yeah, the Edge.
And I felt really sad reading about the story of the band because his big brother was in the band to start, Dick
He's
Evans.
and he's split. Yeah,
And he just
yeah,
kind of went off to college and sort of didn't play
yeah.
with them as much. And so they had a show where poor Dick Evans came out and played with them. And then he like walked off the stage and everybody clapped for him. And then they were like,
Yeah.
okay, now you get to listen to the real you too. Like, I don't know why we had this to
Right,
figure out.
right.
And
That
I'm
poor
thinking
guy.
like he's got to still be out there, right? Like
Of
the Edge's
course.
big brother is
I
probably like,
just I'm just hoping the Edge bought him a car or a
yeah, that's what I'm
house or
thinking. Like,
something,
I
you
hope
know?
he at
Like,
least hooked him up a little bit because the
yeah, I
guy's a
just somehow.
multimillionaire. Like,
Right.
uh,
But anyway, it's a cool
they were talking about, they said Dick Evans is best known as the creator of the band blah blah blah, and I was like, I've
yeah.
never heard of this
Yeah, I've never
band.
heard of that band.
Like,
Never
I
heard
don't
of
know
that
what you're
band
talking
ever.
about.
But I will say that I was happy to find out that Bono and the Edge were given those nicknames. They didn't invent them themselves, and they weren't just stage names. It wasn't just something that I'm going to call myself, Bono and be the lead. Like
Right.
Ringo called himself Ringo. It's not his real
Oh,
name. Ringo Starr is not his real name. I can't remember
that's a
what it
really
is.
good point. It just occurred to me right now when you said that he's probably not, his Christian name is probably not Ringo.
No, it's not
It's,
Ringo
yeah,
Starr that was his stage name, and he gave it to
yeah,
himself, right?
that makes sense.
But Bono was given that name, and the Edge was given that
Okay.
name. Apparently, they were in like some type of street gang or something like that in Dublin,
Oh,
and
oh, so
and and
it predates being
it
in U2,
predates
you're
you
saying.
too, yeah.
Okay,
So they're like when
that's
they're
cool.
14 or 15. But that also explains why Adam and poor Larry didn't have any nicknames. They weren't in the same.
Right. They weren't in the same street gang.
If
Yeah.
anybody could use one, though, they should have given poor Larry a
Larry
nickname.
Mullen Jr. Yeah, well, whatever.
Yeah,
It's just a name. Adam
I
Clayton,
guess
though,
so.
that's like Adam Clayton Powell. There's a street next to my house called Adam Clayton Powell
Huh.
Jr. Boulevard.
What's the
I
name
know
of
there
this
was
of the drummer for the Police? Isn't it Adam something or other?
who
Um,
who?
the drummer for the Police.
Oh,
Um,
it's Stuart Copeland.
oh, is it Stuart Copeland? I thought it was. I
I
don't know why I
think
was
it's
thinking
Stuart
Adam.
Copeland, unless
No, I
I'm
think
talking
you're.
out of
I
my.
know you're right about Copeland.
Yeah, it's Stuart Copeland. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
don't know where I was,
drummer for
where
the
I was getting
Police.
Adam from. Anyway, getting towards the end of it here. What was your biggest surprise? I kind of told you mine. What was your biggest
So
surprise?
my biggest surprise, I really enjoyed learning a lot about the band itself and the sort of mythical interpretation. I was a little bummed to learn that the actual Joshua tree was dead. I think my biggest surprise is kind of weak, but it's a surprise I always have when I come back to this album,
Mhm.
is that, like I said, the 1 2 3 is the biggest 1 2 3 punch I think in rock
Yeah,
music history.
right.
For me, I cannot think of a better start to an album. And then I forget that I actually know and love the rest of the album.
Yeah,
Every single song I really enjoy and can sing along with, and they're all really good. And I always forget that every time I listen to the album. I'm like, am I
Mhm.
really going to listen past With or Without You? Okay, fine, I will. And then Bullet the Blue Sky starts up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great song. Like, what's the matter with me?
Yeah,
That's right. I love this album. So
right.
that's always surprising to me because how often do you come back to an album from 1987? Once every couple of years if you really
Sure.
like it. It's like when we listened to Nevermind again. I was thinking, when was the last time I actually listened to Nevermind all the way through? And it had been a long time. So
Yeah,
when you listen to it as a whole, which is, I don't know about anybody younger than me, but it's hard for me to listen to albums as a whole these days.
yeah,
Even when we're doing the show on an album, I get a little bit like I'm looking at my watch by track 8.
right.
I'm like, ugh. I really, yeah, I know what happens on the rest of this album. Do I have to listen to the whole? And I
Right.
try to because I miss that. I miss that sense of listening to a whole album. It's there's
Yeah,
something lost by not doing it,
right.
but I'm not sure I have the attention span for it anymore,
Yeah.
honestly. So I guess we've come down to the decision point. Is that
Decision
right?
point. That's it.
I chose this. Like I said, I think if you just had the top 3 songs on this album, that you'd go see U2 today just to hear them play those three songs. The rest of the album is great. Nothing else on the album really distinguishes itself in terms of a track, I don't think. But the album's huge. It won several Grammys. I think this is what made U2 a really big band. They were a good band before this, but this is what made them a really big band. The only thing I think would maybe you might have a really interesting conversation about whether Achtung Baby is a better album.
Mhm.
You could probably have that discussion. I think Achtung Baby is maybe better from start to finish, if you know what I mean. Track
Mhm.
track by track by track. I think you're more into Achtung Baby all the way from 1 to 10
Mhm.
than this. But I think this one's richer and I think this one's stronger. I think this is their best album. And I think this is one of the best bands of our
Yeah.
lifetime. So that would be my argument in favor. Those are my I'm gonna go ahead and my opening statements. I rest.
Of
The
course.
floor is to you. Floor is to you,
Well,
prosecutor.
I will, I'll agree that I'll say, I'll take it a little further. I think this is like, if you want to say, what were the 80s like? You would play probably this or maybe Born in the USA. You know, there's a handful of albums that you would say these are the 80s, right? Bruce Springsteen, U2.
So I want to ask you this question when you
Huh?
say that though. I want to ask you this question. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I
Sure.
think it's an important conversation. Are these representative of the 80s or are these the best of the 80s?
I think they are
Because I think these
probably,
sort of stand out. I think Born in the USA, even more so than this, kind of stands outside the 80s to me. It's almost like
I don't think so. I
transcends
think
the time period, you know?
I mean, I think it's come to be that, but I mean, I think if you were to say, what would the sound of the 80s be?
Right.
This would be in the conversation. I'm not saying it's the
Yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
you
Okay.
could talk about Michael Jackson, right? Thriller
Definitely.
or Bad maybe. Um, you would talk about probably Bruce Springsteen, but you two would be in that conversation. So this would be probably, I mean, I'm just saying there's probably a handful of albums that you would say this is what the 80s were. I don't think
Right.
it would be, I don't think it would be George Michael's Faith. I don't think it would be Whitney Houston. I mean, those certainly came out in the 80s, but I think like stuff that you would hear all over the place, stuff that you would just say, man, that's the 80s. Like I remember the 80s because of
Um,
this. I think there are a few albums that do that. This is certainly one of them. I don't think The Cure does that. I think this one does that. You mentioned Octung Baby. Octung Baby wouldn't exist without this album because this album gave them the propulsion they needed to then change. I mean, Octung
yeah.
Baby, they changed their style completely from this. They were able to kind of react with where the time was going, or maybe they evolved, or maybe they matured or something. But the fact is, they were able to sort of redefine, who U2 was. It feels like they were growing. It's kind of like The Cure in this way, that they were growing more and more mature as the albums progressed, right? And that's what bands do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was the album where they solidified their writing, their songwriting, their playing, their sound, their techniques, and that let them do Octum Baby, which really is the tight one. Is so tight. Everything works together. Every song is just, I mean, every single song kicks on that
Yeah.
album. But I think this album took them to that. I think also, like you said, I mean, U2, I remember them in Live Aid. I remember them doing all this stuff like that. But then suddenly they were everywhere. When Joshua Tree came out, the Joshua Tree, everywhere you looked, you were seeing U2, and they're doing all this philanthropic stuff, all this
Yeah.
charity work. I mean, they were just everywhere. I think like Bono was like an ambassador for the UN for a while for Africa or something like that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
all this stuff, right? I mean, they were just everywhere. This album, and for those who don't remember, those who weren't there at the time, it's hard to explain how, like, when an album like this drops, when it just explodes overnight, like how big
Right.
it really is. Especially in a time when we talked about this before, where content was a lot more limited back then than it is now. We had far fewer
Oh, yeah.
channels,
God,
far fewer
yes.
artists, everything else.
Yeah.
And it was all curated by companies and stuff. And so the
Right.
stuff that got through, it had to usually be pretty good. These guys were just everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
heavy rotation on MTV. You couldn't turn on MTV when it played music, or VH1, for that matter, without seeing one of these songs every single day, for a year and a half or 2 years.
Mhm.
So I'm with you. I'm toasting this classic for sure. I
Okay.
think
All right.
U2 definitely deserves it. This is easy. We need to pick some more controversial stuff. We need to find
Yeah,
something that the
that's
other
the
one
thing
will
about
like.
letting it just pop into my head is I didn't really come up with something particularly controversial. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who'd be like, this just sucks. In fact,
Right?
that's what one of the reviewers said about their first album. He was just like, you're gonna have trouble finding anybody who'll say anything bad about the
Yeah.
sound of U2. Not inoffensive, that's the wrong word for it, but it's just demonstrably good.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna say this is bad.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So not a whole big interesting conversation, but yet I was glad to delve into U2 a little bit and learn a little bit about them.
Yeah. Me
And there's
too.
more to do. I wish I knew more about Brian Eno. I wish I knew more about Island Records. There's more things I sort
Yeah.
of touched the surface of in my research that I wouldn't mind learning about. But
For sure. I'm going to learn more about Larry. I think that's my goal.
Yeah.
Why didn't you get a nickname for Larry?
Yeah. Let's do a whole Larry podcast. Yeah. Probably the question is, who is the more forgotten Larry? Is it Jack Tripper's friend from Three's Company?
Oh, that poor Larry.
Yeah. Both
that's
of
a
them
tough one.
are second fiddles. There's a lot of second fiddles.
That's a tough one. I know that there in the past Larry played a brass instrument because that name goes with. I'm really thinking trombone. I think Larry plays trombone.
Okay.
So I'm gonna find that out.
I had a brief dalliance with the trombone in 5th grade.
Oh, did you? Called you out with the trombone.
I played enough to get like a indentation on my lip that never went away from playing trombone.
Really? Wow, my goodness.
Yeah, apparently it forms some kind of a thing on your playing a brass instrument gives you some kind of a mark on your upper lip that I don't think.
Thank goodness I was in orchestra.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. So we toasted this one. What's our next venture going to be?
Next thing we're going to do, we are going to also deal with the mythical America, as it turns out. That might have been on my mind at the time I was choosing things, because the next one is a book, and it is On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
That's right.
We're gonna do a controversial trip across the wastelands of America one more time.
We're going to discover America.
This one I think is going to be a little more interesting about whether or not it holds up and whether or not we can still revere this thing in 2023. So
maybe for the next episode, we should both drop acid and just do stream of consciousness for an hour. I think that
sounds like a lot of fun to me. I don't know, but get some ayahuasca.
There we go.
Have a whole experience.
Absolutely. Well, okay. Right, well, thank you for joining us, everybody. All 5 of you.
From Dave McArthur, I am signing off.
From Clint Lanier, I am too signing off. And we'll talk to you next time.
Peace out.
Bye.
That's it for episode 84 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some simple Scotch whiskey and Drambuie to make a rusty nail for our discussion of Jack Kerouac's On the Road. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know whether you think America is living up to its mythic potential. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.